We're talking Oregon Ducks football on the Our Football Network, Our Football YouTube channel. I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in here as we get closer and closer to the very first real playoffs, 12-team playoffs in college football for the FBS. And the number one team right now, and they've been that way for several weeks, the Oregon Ducks. So no better time than to reintroduce back to the network, editor of GoDucks.com, Rob Moseley. Rob, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, good to see you too, Rob. So the last time we talked, we were going over, as we have done the last several years, how the season might look preseason. But this is the first time we get an opportunity to talk where it's getting serious. The Ducks are number one, and everybody's looking at them as like the only team, the only power team in college football, even though there's a little slip up, almost a little slip up last week. But for the most part, they're the strong, undefeated team that everybody's gunning for right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Indiana has a chance to make a really big statement against Ohio State this week, and I think probably change some perceptions of them right now. But yeah, I think, given Oregon's win over Ohio State, that's kind of the marquee single result probably across the country so far, head to head. So, the respect that the Ducks garnered from that, I think continues to pay dividends in the rankings and such, despite, as you refer to, at least maybe a couple of close calls the last couple of weeks where this team playing, at Wisconsin was 8 games in 8 weeks. And I think you saw an Oregon team that was feeling the effects of that and very much in need of a bye this week before taking on a rival next week.
Yeah, what's interesting, and I'm not sure most people would have predicted this, but when you take a look at the team offensively and defensively, it's really the defense that has been hanging in there just as good, if not better, statistically. Matter of fact, statistically, the defense has been better than the offense. Why is that?
Well, I think you start with the fact that this is just a really, really, really good defense. And, I think that, it had been trending that way for several years, a more balanced Oregon team than, I think the perception from the Chip Kelly years really, really lingered for a long time. And even then it wasn't that accurate. I think you look at NFL rosters now, you see DeForest Buckner, you see Eric Armstead. I mean, there were some really elite defensive players, guys in the defensive backfield who've hung around for a long time. Troy Hill, Terrence Mitchell on NFL rosters. There were some really, really good defenses that Oregon was playing, back in the Chip Kelly and then into the Marcus Mariota years. But the offense was just so good that got all the attention. And with that, it was with good reason too. But, it's been kind of like turning the Titanic to get that perception to change. But I think that process has really been, rocket fueled by the addition of Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy on the coaching staff and the job they've done. Personnel wise, just the depth of this team. Oregon beat Ohio State without Jordan Birch, who a lot of people think is the best player on this team. And Birch didn't play at Wisconsin, and yet still it was a really, really elite defensive performance against, albeit, maybe not the most explosive offense this team has faced all year, but a team. I'm happen to be in the middle of watching the game over again right now, and it's the third quarter, and Wisconsin's physicality up front is really giving Oregon a lot of problems. And yet, Ducks found a way to win by scoring a couple times in the fourth quarter, but also playing shutdown defense in the fourth quarter as well. So it's just a really good, deep unit. But then offensively, I think the last couple weeks you're seeing the effects of the absence of Tez Johnson since he got hurt at Michigan. He was the leading receiver for this team. Just a level of separation that's really unusual across the nation. And I think a guy who, Dylan Gabriel relied on a lot. Terrence Ferguson, the tight end, missed a couple games, had his appendix out, and has kind of been getting back into it. Evan Stewart got targeted 12 times against Wisconsin, caught 10 balls, but also I think, he's a guy who's going to have a lot of attention now from defenses until Tez Johnson comes back. But Jordan James just just like the defense really buckled down in the second half, but really that fourth quarter against Wisconsin, Jordan James, Ducks scored 10 points in the fourth quarter to come from behind to beat Wisconsin. Jordan James had 65 rushing yards on those two scoring drives, over half of his total in the game. And was just moving at a different speed than everyone else on the field in those situations. So found a way to win, and sometimes that's what you got to do.
Absolutely. And it's also, I think, it shows you that, look, the Big Ten is an obvious step up from the Pac-12. And
I don't know about that. I mean, I think every league in the country, and the Pac-12 is no different, has a couple of really good teams. And then you look in the middle and you say, I don't know who is the really good amongst this mushy middle. And then there's some bottom feeders. So I don't want to get too defensive on behalf of that, but I think that perception was unfair back when the Pac-12 existed. I think it remains unfair now. I think there's really good teams in the Big Ten, and Oregon's one of them. I think there were really good teams in the Pac-12, and Oregon was often one of those as well. Anyway, to your point.
That's okay. I like it. Talk then about, you go ahead and pronounce his name.
Mateo Uiagalelei?
Yeah, that's it. Because we saw him make some big plays, obvious. I mean, the plays were just awesome in the Wisconsin game. And you talk, of course, with Birch being out, so he steps up. How good can he be? How do you compare him to some of the other pass rushers and defenders that you've seen there?
Yeah, you look at his versatility, and I think you don't have to go too far back to Kayvon Thibodeau, a guy who could put his hand on the ground. I think I look back at, I think it was the 2019 Pac-12 championship game against Utah. There were times Thibodeau would basically line up at nose against a really physical team in Utah, and it was an impact player in that game, playing that role amongst others, but also a guy who could stand up on the edge and wreak havoc that way. And Mateo's a guy who's doing that as well. He was much more of a stand-up edge guy when Jordan Birch has been available, but he's been able to slide down, put his hand on the ground, and play much more with his hand on the ground with Birch out, and be just as effective, if not more so. So he's a guy who's, I think he's second in the Big Ten in sacks right now, 12th nationally. I think the top 15 in the Big Ten in sacks. He's the only one with an interception, and what a play that was to clinch the victory in Wisconsin. So, former 5-star recruit who's just, his ceiling is really, really high. And, I think he's that perfect combination that is so rare, but you love to find it when you can, of a guy who has elite gifts, but then comes out to practice every day and just seems to enjoy the work every day. All of us who go to work every day know that, it's not every day you go bebopping through the front door of the office, stoked to be there. Some days you're just punching the clock. We're all guilty of that. And, Mateo is very rarely guilty if ever, in practice. I mean, he just is a guy who seems to really enjoy the process. And so when you combine that kind of a passion and work ethic with all of his gifts, just a really, really elite talent who with a really, really high ceiling.
He's a true sophomore?
Yeah.
Wow. Even more impressive.
Got him for another year, thankfully. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And we all appreciate that. Talk about the interior guys, because a lot of times they don't get the recognition. But both Caldwell and Harmon, are definitely some, prospects, next tier prospects that we'll talk a lot more about here on Our Lads. Harmon, wow. I mean, for a guy that's about 330 pounds, he can really even get to the quarterback. He seems like he's one of these guys that might actually be a lot better than people think.
Yeah, no, he was a guy who was really highly coveted in the portal this year, coming out of Michigan State, and a guy, obviously, the Ducks were really, really happy to get. Now we're seeing why. And, you look at draft projections, and, there's some places looking at him as maybe like a top 15 prospect for the draft next spring. So, just the way he moves and the way he works for his size, I mean, he just really causes problems. And Jamari Caldwell, just kind of that classic plugger in the middle of the line, too. And, another guy who came in through the portal. So, you just can't have too many D linemen. Again, we talk about, this defense being kind of a next level unit, And we all for as vigorous as my defense was of the Pac-12 a few minutes ago, obviously what separated particularly the SEC over the years, but I think some Big Ten programs too, was defensive line talent. And Oregon, the most glaring examples for the Ducks is Oregon would go against some Ohio State teams in let's see, the 2009 season, that Rose Bowl, and the 2014, that national championship game, and see some D linemen that were just kind of different. And now Oregon's able to get guys like that, both homegrown recruiting. The guy that second guy behind Harmon on that depth chart there, Amari Washington, looks like a really, really stout guy. For right now in the rotation, but moving forward in particular when some spots open up next year.
Okay.
But also adding guys through the portal, obviously, has really paid dividends too. So, those guys are really setting a tone up front.
Yeah, and that linebacker, and correct me if I'm pronouncing his name, Bryce Betcher. Betcher. Okay, so it's Betcher.
Yeah, he's probably one of the best stories on the team. He's a Eugene kid. He's a two-sport player. He was drafted by the Houston Astros in the Major League Baseball draft this year. Gold Glove center fielder on our baseball team. But I think his head knows that baseball might be his future, but his heart is on the football field. So he wanted one last chance at least to come out and strap it on this fall before turning his attention to baseball. But really been a playmaker for this defense at linebacker. Jeff Boss is kind of the quarterback of the defense. He's the leader back there, the vocal leader, but he got hurt in the first game of the year, and it was kind of slow to get back. So by necessity, some other guys had to kind of assert themselves. Devin Jackson's a guy who his athleticism is just off the charts, and kind of took advantage of that situation to get some more reps under his belt and become a really reliable rotation player. But Betcher's kind of a rock in that lineup now, and a guy who I think a lot of us saw as maybe kind of primarily like a run stuffer, but has been able to be a guy who can stay on the field in almost any situation at this point. And again, Eugene native, two-sport kid, just a guy who bleeds green and yellow and has since a really young age. Obviously, he's a guy who grew up watching the Ducks, so pretty fun to see him thriving now.
And how's the secondary? Because it sure looks like it's strong there. Muhammad is having looks like another good year, but there's some nice depth there as well. Are you kind of surprised about anybody in particular, or this is what kind of you expected from these guys?
Yeah, no, I mean, there was only one returning starter in Tyshim Johnson, and so went hard in the portal again. That's been a trend the last couple of years in the secondary. Jabbar Muhammad is a guy who just a lockdown guy on one corner. Kobe Savage is a real big hitter, and we saw that when he got here in the spring, and so he's been a nice addition there, a guy who can come up and stop the run. Brandon Johnson's been a playmaker as the nickel guy, another transfer from Duke. And so the question mark was that other corner spot, and Dante Manning's a former 5-star recruit that was recruited to Oregon. Nico Reed's a guy who came through the portal. It was just a question of kind of how are things going to get sorted out there at that position. And both guys have played up this year, but kind of been the guy that's usually gets the first call, but then Dante Manning rotates in there as well. So those two guys being able to kind of hold down that other corner spot, that was kind of, if there was a question mark in the secondary, that was it. And they've been quite capable there.
All right. So then that is, like you said, that's the one part then that if they were playing a team that had sort of like Ohio State that has, 2 or 3 quality receivers, that's the type of team that might cause the most issues for the Ducks defense.
I'm sorry.
I was saying that the playing a team like Ohio State, not that there's many teams out there like Ohio State that have that type of talent at receiver, but generally that would be the type of team that would give Oregon's defense a little bit of an issue potentially.
I was struggling with that because Oregon beat Ohio State.
Yes, no question.
Their receiver talent is elite, no doubt. But that freshman is really something else. But
I guess if you had to pick one issue
when that game was decided, I think by the same token, neutral field or at Ohio State, certainly that game was close enough. You could argue it could have gone another way. But, if somebody said those are the two best teams in the country, I'd certainly believe it, and I wouldn't argue about it.
So you think defensively, though, before we go back to the offense, that you'd say that the run defense and the pass defense is equally strong, that you think this is a well-balanced defense overall?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, this is, this secondary has more interceptions than touchdowns. And you go back in the recent history of Oregon teams that have been able to do that. It's the 2019 team that won the Rose Bowl. It's the 2012 team that went 12-1. It's only lost in overtime to a really good Stanford team. That was the last Oregon team before this one to be ranked number one. The one before that was 2010, the first Oregon team ever to be ranked number one. So, when you have a secondary performing like this one has usually led to really, really good Oregon teams. But then, by the same token, you look at the run defense, and, I think there were some question marks early in the year.
Okay.
Boise State, and now I think we all look back at that Boise State game and kind of reassess the significance of that outcome and the way that game played out, given just how good that team is and how good that running back is.
All right. And as far as the offense is concerned, we already talked about it a little bit. How's the offensive line doing this year compared to some of the other Oregon offenses over the last several seasons?
I mean, it's had to shift on the fly. It started one group the first couple of games, made one change, moved Pancho Lalaulu into center from guard, and then put Nishad Strother in to a starting spot at guard. Things kind of stabilized there. I think there were a lot of reasons the Ducks kind of got rolling through kind of week 2, week 3, week 4. That was one of them, but it's lineup changes are always an easy thing to point to as a reason for different level of play. But then Marcus Harper, who was the other starting guard, got hurt. That was at Michigan as well, and so he's been out. And so Dave Iuli, who was coming off off-season surgery, kind of got healthy just at the right time and has been able to get on the field the last couple of games and help there at that guard spot. Kavika Rogers, another guy who can rotate in. He can play kind of all over the line, so he's kind of a Swiss Army knife there. But, I think, again, you look back at the first couple games, offensive line makes a lineup change going into week 3. Things start to look better.
Okay.
It's an overgeneralization to say that's why, but it was a factor. I think you look at the last couple weeks, the offense has really had a hard time finding rhythm. It's been dealing with the loss of a starting lineman. It's an overgeneralization to say that's why, but that's been a factor as well. So, this bye week coming at the right time, I think should prove fruitful because either Harper is healthy, gets back for the Washington game, or you just have a week now to kind of take a deep breath, build some more chemistry with this new group, and then kind of get rolling again, hopefully, as the postseason approaches.
Yeah, Connerly and Cornelius, of course, entered the season as maybe the only if you take a look at bookends, I mean, LSU, number one, most people would say, but then they'd look at Oregon and say, hey, that's pretty damn good too. Who do you think has a better upside overall in your mind? I know you're not a scout.
Yeah, I'm not. But I don't want to get over my skis there. I mean, I think if you look at going into this season, it seemed like Cornelius was getting a little more draft buzz. Now it seems like Connerly might. But that's really all I have to go on. That's not really my forte.
So is anybody on either side because you mentioned, of course, the injury to Tez, but he should be back hopefully, of course. So is there anybody, though, anybody important that may not be able to return?
I mean, I probably wouldn't talk about it publicly.
Okay.
If I knew.
That's okay. Fair enough.
The paycheck does come from the university, so
that's okay. Fair enough.
I've always got to keep in mind when I'm talking about this team.
Okay. What about the kicking game? Especially, the team needs a real big kick, clutch situation. That doesn't happen very often for a team that's number one usually. So confident that their kicker can get the job done? Is there one of those things where, well, I guess we'll just have to see?
Yeah, I mean, Atticus Sappington today was named, Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week. Made 3 big kicks, including the go-ahead, basically game winner to beat Wisconsin late in that game. So, a guy who, has made big kicks, on the road now. The question, he did make a 42-yarder against Wisconsin. That's looking like it's about the far end of his range. Oregon has used another kicker, Andrew Boyle, this year for some longer attempts. So, I think to your question, if the situation arises that you need like a 47, 48 yarder in a situation like that, where do the coaches turn? And, I'm not sure, given the situation, what the answer to that would be. But, I think certainly anything inside about 45, it looks like they have a lot of confidence in Sappington, and he's, for the most part, backed that up.
And I probably should also add in the fact that Terrence Ferguson is one of the top tight ends in the nation. And boy, we're already going over the draft for next year and even the year after. It just seems like, wow, the tight end class is going to be outstanding. And Ferguson is one of them.
Yeah, just a really athletic guy who can catch the ball. He can get down the field. Early in the second half against Wisconsin, he should have had a deep ball for a go-ahead touchdown to open the second half, and just lost his footing and wasn't able to get under it. But probably makes the catch, scores a touchdown right there, and who knows if Oregon's able to build some momentum off that, the way the rest of that game plays out. But again, lost his footing, but as a guy who can get behind the defense as he does and really, really stretch the field.
Yes.
He late in the game, first play of the fourth quarter, comes up with a really clutch catch with a guy all over him, a couple different arms, hands reaching for the ball between him and Dylan Gabriel, is able to keep his concentration and just make a huge catch on a fourth down play to extend a drive and keep things rolling. It really was the critical play of that game, because you're at Camp Randall Stadium. They've just played jump around, obviously, as they do at the end of the third quarter. The place is going nuts. Oregon's looking at a 4-9. Wisconsin's got the lead, smelling blood. And then the Ducks come out, make a huge play, drive to a tying touchdown, and kind of take the life out of the place, really flip momentum. And Ferguson's the guy who catches that ball. So it was a great throw, but a great catch as well. So, yeah, he's a guy who I'm excited to see what he can do at the next level for sure.
Yeah, you made the great point there, because I was going to jump on it as well, which is, but not many tight ends can actually get down the field the way Ferguson did, even though he wasn't able to, which I remember looking at it and going, wait, that's Ferguson?
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah,
I mean, I couldn't believe for a tight end he was all the way down the field like that, but that just shows you why he's special.
I think we talked about it preseason, though. Kenyon Sadiq is a guy you really need to have your eye on the next couple of years for this offense, because you talk about an athletic freak at the tight end position, and they're finding a lot of different ways to get him the ball. We've seen it, run plays, screens, streaking up the seam, just all kinds of different ways to get him involved, because he's a guy you want with the ball in his hands, just a freaky combination of size and athleticism. And so, when Ferguson moves on, the tight end spot's going to be in good hands still.
Yeah, I've got my notes here because I asked you about breakout candidates, and he was one of them. So I make sure that that's something that I won't forget. And then overall, I have to ask you Jordan James, because a lot of people are going to talk about him with the draft, and they're going to say, well, his size very similar to Bucky Irving. So tell me what the difference is between Jordan James and Bucky Irving.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably an oversimplification, but Jordan James is looking to run through you, and Bucky can, but Bucky's elusiveness is just so special that he's going to try to make a guy miss and get to the next level that way. Jordan James is just he's that guy who's going to put his pads down, put his head down, and just run right through you. And we saw, even it didn't strike me as much during the game. It struck me during the fourth quarter that he was moving at a different speed than everyone else. But watching the first half, as I just was a little bit earlier this afternoon, when he gets the ball, he is immediately going at top speed. And again, just, trying to run right through the line, right through whatever defender's in his way and go. I assume more, there'll be questions about his elusiveness, about his high end speed, things like that. But in terms of a power guy who is his feet move quick and he gets rolling and he builds up a head of steam in it. And at least at this level, you got to watch out. He is really hard to bring down. The difference for him is between him and a lot of guys is, he's not turning it a lot of 10-yard runs into 20-yard runs.
Yep.
But he sure is piling up a lot of 10-yard runs, 15-yard runs, things like that. And again, 65 of his 121 yards were on those 2 scoring drives that led to points in the fourth quarter at Wisconsin. Just a huge, huge difference maker for this team in that game when the chips were down.
And then lastly, and then I'm just going to wrap up by talking about the game next week, but a little bit about, is there anything that you want to see more of from Dylan Gabriel? Is there something that's maybe he's left on the table? Because obviously he's done a real good job engineering the number 1 team in the country. He's had a very good college football career. But is there something in his game that maybe he even says, you know what, I got to be better at this?
Yeah, I think there's no question about it. The turnovers in the red zone, we saw one at Wisconsin, and it was a tipped ball that was picked off, but it was tipped because it was thrown a little bit behind the receiver. And it's been a handful of turnovers now down the red zone for him. He's a guy who, he's an aggressive guy. He's a smart guy, but he's aggressive. He's looking to make plays. And so, some of those mistakes in the red zone, again, you talk about, what kind of a momentum play that long pass to Ferguson could have been early in the second half. Well, that turnover in the red zone in the first half, if that doesn't happen and Oregon scores there, you put Wisconsin in a hole, and that's just not a team that was built to come from behind, dig itself out of a big gap. So that game could have gone, much differently if Oregon had been able to capitalize better on some opportunities. There were a couple field goals early. If you're able to score touchdowns there instead of get field goals, or if you're able, if you could avoid that turnover. So I think, for him, it's pretty simple. Those turnovers in the red area have it's cropped up. I think it's 4 interceptions across 3 different games. So, I'm sure he would be the first to say, that's something that he's got to clean up because, in an important game, and hopefully there's a few of those coming up in the next several weeks for Oregon. Those can just be so costly.
Okay, let's first of all, I got to ask you about the rankings and the new playoff format and the bracket. So how does that look? I know anything can happen. That's why I kind of think that when people start already zeroing in on when they look at the bracket and they start looking at matchups, I just think it's so many things are going to happen that some of them you may be able to predict. But do you have a guess, or do you have maybe even, I know, well, how about the fans even? Maybe I'll throw that in there. Is there something that the fans would like to see, or do you think there would be like have you noticed with the way the brackets are that, hey, you know what, maybe that'd be a really cool matchup to see such and such team come to Oregon, after the first round?
Well, from a fan perspective, I think going back 15 years, a lot of Oregon fans would have loved to seen an Oregon-Alabama matchup over the years. And, if somehow that came to pass, I think probably various permutations you could probably pencil out by way of making that happen. I think Oregon's fans would probably, really enjoy that. We Want Bama was kind of the rallying cry several years ago when Oregon really started to compete at this level on a consistent basis, and it just kind of never came to pass. So, I think that's a matchup a lot of Oregon fans would really like. I think there's some classic, classic probably not the word when you're talking about Colorado, but, some former Pac-12 matchups, whether it's an Arizona State or a Colorado, that I think fans would probably think is pretty fun. Getting another crack at Boise State and just seeing, I think Oregon feels like they've really grown a lot since that first. Could that be a different kind of showing a second time around? But I think for a lot of people, the question right now is obviously hosting a game would be really, really fun in the first round, but you want to position yourself to stay alive for as long as possible. So you want that first round bye. So
yes,
I think everybody would sacrifice the thrill of hosting a playoff game in Autzen Stadium for the chance to just have a bye, have a week off, and know you're through to the quarterfinals that way.
Yeah, and it's also like you said, you get the bye, and then the big thing though is the way it's set. One more game, and by the way, having a bye the way Oregon has it is, I mean, very unusual. Just before the regular season ends, there's a bye, so but
Paid
that's
the
worked
price
out.
for it. Like I said, eight games over the last 8 weeks, and I
Yeah,
feel like you saw that a little bit because the offense was a little bit flat coming out against Maryland 2 weeks ago. It started to feel like, oh, maybe these guys are showing the rigors a little bit. And again, you're playing with a new look offensive line. You're playing without Tez Johnson, so a lot of factors there. But I think
sure.
particularly last week, going out to Wisconsin, your 8th game in 8 weeks, with all those injuries and everything else, this was really a team that, very much earned this week of rest right now.
And they're taking on Washington, and this is really going to be a big game in the sense that it's a double revenge for Oregon
Right. Yeah.
after what happened last year. Matter of fact, Washington's beaten Oregon the last three, all as dogs, I believe, including 2 as double-digit dogs, and that one of them was the championship game last year that, unfortunately, Oregon fans remember. So, even though they're undefeated, Washington, lucky enough, I guess, in their respect, that they got their bowl clinching situation out of the way. They don't have to beat Oregon to be bowl eligible. That would have been a tough task. But is that what you're kind of feeling? That even though, look, this is just any opponent, and yeah, the record may say so, but this is a big game for the team after what happened last year.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's always been the sense that kind of Oregon State was kind of your in-state rival, that obviously you wanted to beat them every time you played them. But other than that, you didn't mind. I think most Oregon fans didn't mind if Oregon State had some success. It's the real venomous type of rivalry that Oregon feels for Washington, and particularly so after the results the last couple of years. So, it obviously Washington's always going to be able to say that it was the team in a game with the stakes that the matchups last year had came out on top. And this year's not going to have that for both teams. There's really only one team that's really playing for the highest of stakes. So it's a different flavor to it, but I don't think that will mute the celebration at all for Oregon fans if the Ducks are able to find a way to come out on top. And I mean, Dan Lanning, that's kind of been his Achilles heel. So it's a different kind of matchup. I mean, Kalen DeBoer's not there anymore. Michael Penix is not there anymore. Roma Dunze is not there anymore. And those guys were really, kind of the main reason that Washington was able to come out on top of those matchups. So that's a different kind of flavor to this matchup too. But still, I don't think, I think based on the results the last couple of years, this team's going to have Oregon's full attention regardless of all that. And again, if the Ducks are able to come out with a win, it's not going to take away from the celebration at all.
Yeah, they're matter of fact, Washington just 1-7. I know this isn't anything other than a handicapping note, but they're 1-7 against the spread following rest, a bye, and sometimes that could be looked at, especially if they're the same coaching staff, which Washington does not. But I know Lanning hasn't been there very long, but have you noticed anything at all with the team following an off week on just how they play generally?
No, I mean, Oregon had its first bye week before the start of conference play. And I think, there were some questions about this team going into that point of the season based on the first couple of weeks that I think were answered pretty resoundingly, coming off that bye in late September and into early October. And obviously the Ohio State game, was the loudest statement to that effect. But, this is actually the third straight opponent Oregon's going to face coming off a bye week.
Interesting.
The good news is the Ducks themselves have a bye week before this one as well.
Yeah.
Again, when we talk about kind of reasons the last couple of weeks didn't look necessarily like Oregon might have wanted them to, that's another factor too. You're playing all those weeks in a row, and then both Maryland and Wisconsin were coming off a bye, whereas Oregon was not. So, just the fact that the Ducks are able to kind of sit back, take a deep breath right now, kind of regroup, reassess, reformulate, and get ready for, a huge rivalry game and then the postseason, most welcome for sure.
Do you think that the fans, did Oregon beat Ohio State already? So do you think the fans are actually rooting for, if they had to, they do, but rooting for, say, Indiana because, we played Ohio State. We beat them already. We don't need to play them again. Well, let's take on Indiana. They might, because then they would be undefeated.
I don't have a sense for that. No, really. I mean, I think there's a lot of respect for Ohio State. As I said earlier, if you want to say, Oregon and Ohio State are the class of the country and everybody else is maybe a step behind, you'd probably find a lot of people that agree with that. I mean, I don't know that. I haven't watched a lot of Texas. I haven't watched a lot of Georgia. I'm so locked in on Oregon week to week. So, but I think, you look at a lot of rankings, you look at a lot of polls, it seems like the 1-2 are pretty darn near unanimous. And so I think you probably could talk to some Oregon fans who are like, we were happy to have that win under our belts. We wouldn't mind not seeing them again because that's clearly another really, really good team. Then again, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. And so, if they really are the class of the nation, that matchup's going to pop up again. So
that's right.
You better be ready for it.
And the crazy thing is that it might happen a third time.
Right.
And that's the whole thing now that we're going to see with this playoff system is that could very well happen a lot. Right. Where we could see, not a lot, but, at some point we're going to see it. We're going to see one team and another team. They're going to play each other in the championship game, and it'll be so we'll see how that goes. But the NFL is used to stuff like that, and I guess college football players and teams are going to have to start getting used to that as well. That's the life in the playoffs. So, again, I want to thank you as always, Rob, for doing this because I know how busy you are. You're actually heading to Hawaii, right? You're going to watch some women's hoops?
Yeah, our women's team is leaving Thursday. They're playing in a tournament out there, games Monday, Tuesday. So it's a rough life, but somebody's got to spend a week in the islands covering those games. So not a bad way to spend the football bye week, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And we hope, of course, there's a lot of football left. So we hope to have the time to talk to you again at some point before the season's all done because this could very well be a special season for Oregon and maybe the most special yet. So, again, thanks a lot for your time, Rob.
Yeah, 100%. Anytime. Good talking to you.
You got it.